Thanks everyone for coming. I think we'll get started. So, hello to everybody. My name's Professor Alex Leff. I'm one of the Deputy Directors here and fittingly Head of Education, which is one of the reasons we're here today. So we're here to celebrate Tim's elevation to Professor. Now, within UCL, most people get promoted via the academic route or the research route. It's a bit confusing. They sound similar, but they're different. But there's a third route that you can get promoted via, and that's via the teaching route, which is where you lean heavily on your educational activities, which have to be both local, national and international, and we'll hear that from Tim. So Tim's actually the first person in the history of the Institute of Neurology to be promoted on the back of their educational efforts. So that's something to be very proud of, I think, both for Tim and also for us at the ION. They say that medical education, at least, is saving lives in slow motion, and Tim's going to talk a little bit about his work with medics, but he's also educated far outside of clinical medicine, as you'll see, in neurosciences in general. And with Amit, helped set up, Amit actually set up the very innovative distance learning clinical neurology course, which still runs here. And Tim's very interested in online education, again, as you'll hear. So I'm just going to give a very quick potted biography because you've really come here to see Tim talk. Tim did his first degree in biomedical sciences and then qualified as a doctor from King's, where he came very close to getting the gold medal. He came second in the whole of London, which I think is pretty impressive. He then did a PhD in neuroscience at Imperial College with an interest in autonomic nervous system. And really, in the last 10 years or so, he's really dedicated himself to his educational activities, employing a lot of novel methods in medical education, and he'll give you loads of examples. He's also recently became a principal fellow of the Higher Education Academy. Again, he's the first person in the Institute of Neurology to become a principal of the Higher Education Academy. And he's only the third person that we know of, even within the Faculty of Brain Sciences. It's not an easy thing to get. He's got a whole host of other awards, mostly, but not exclusively, on the educational front. And that's not to say he hasn't had an academic career. He's published over 50 peer-reviewed papers and has several handfuls of grants that he's got as a PI, most of them on the educational front. So, after Tim's lecture, the vote of thanks is going to come from Dr. Amit Batla, who they've worked very close together, and then we've got refreshments. So without further ado, if you can welcome Tim to the lectern. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Alex, and thank you to every single one of you. I just want to briefly start by giving a little bit of orientation, because not all of you are from ION, not all of you are from UCL or even medics. So the picture there shows Queen Square. It's actually the northeast corner. The rather ugly grey building there, that's the Institute of Neurology. It is due for a renovation, or leastwise people are due to move to a new improved version at 256 Gray's Inn Road next year. I will mention that briefly near the end. It's the second leading neuroscience centre in the world. It's where I work. I also have an honorary contract at the Orange Building, the hospital. So that's the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery. So I'm going to move on and start by thanking people. Importantly, I need to thank Alex and Amit, who are here to support me on the stage. And particularly thank you also to Derek and also to Ben from the medical illustration team for their excellent support. I want to thank everyone who I've come into contact with over the years at the ION and elsewhere for supporting me, including my friends and family. And most of all, I really want to thank every single one of you here today. I know there's a late flurry of apologies with illness, so I was rather worried how few might turn out. So I'm very grateful to all of you. It means a lot to me. Now, I'm going to give you an overview in one slide of my whole lecture. I promise the lecture will be done in 1 hour. It is traditionally supposed to be an hour. Inaugural lectures are slightly unusual because we're supposed to bring something of the speaker, that's me, into our talk, so you will see some family photos, but I will try and make them relevant. I will show you what I've learned from those experiences. Importantly, I will spend 2 slides explaining why neurology needs teachers. It's a fundamental aspect of my talk, and I will cover that in a little bit of detail. 2017 was also a pivotal year for me because it was the year I stopped being a full-time clinical neurologist to a part-time clinical neurologist and part-time neurology educator here at the ION. I'm sorry, I've got one slide only on surveys. I know they're boring, but they were quite important to me. COVID and talking heads, I'll just leave it like that, a bit enigmatic at the moment. International medical student teaching, very dear to my heart, although I don't get paid for it. And then the new clinical neurology and brain sciences, IBSC. I'm delighted to see some of my students from my course, and I'm sorry they don't get extra marks for turning up, but thank you for turning up. And looking ahead, finally. Okay, so I'm starting, obviously, at the beginning. I was born in Bristol in 1968. However, quite early on, we moved to Reading. This is a picture of my wonderful parents. Sadly, my mum, Sally Young, died 11 years ago, and my dad, Dr. Edward Young, died 2 years ago. And it's particularly ironic that he died of Alzheimer's because he was actually the brightest person I've ever met in my life. He was also the person that I first think of as a teacher because although he knew so much, he'd always try and bring us in if we ever happened to know something that he didn't. And later on in my talk, I'll try to give examples of how I've tried to follow that with students, trying to get them involved in joint publications. This shows my sister Hazel, who's here today, having her arm, actually just the raincoat, twisted by my brother Edward, who's also here today. And I'm studiously recording this, presumably to blackmail my brother later on in life. As a matter of fact, I was apparently taking a picture of an insect on his sleeve, and that's actually quite important, as I will show you that my love of taking pictures of nature a bit later on. This is a slightly more up-to-date version, and just going from left to right, really some of the key people there. We've got Eden, who's here today, my brother-in-law, just on the left. Then it's me with the striped shirt. My son Luke has his arm on my shoulder. And then moving forward as well, we can see my sister and Alison with the striped top, dark glasses. My wife, Debbie, with the dark top and dark glasses. My brother Edward with dark glasses. My sister with dark glasses. In fact, they seemed to know even 2 or 3 years ago that they'd be here today and colour-coded accordingly. Now, I left out one, my brother-in-law, Adam. I'm ashamed to say I asked him to take that photo, and the only other photo I could take was of him similarly acting in a servant role, and I feel very sorry for this, so I do apologise to Adam for mistreating him. But I want to talk about this. This was my first ever secondary school report. You don't need to read it in detail. There are 2 reasons for showing this. It's not to show off. There are 2 reasons. The first is about feedback. As an educator, we're told you start with positives, and then afterwards you say, even better if. Now, they were to the point in the 1980s, a disastrous half year, he must get himself sorted out soon. Now, the main reason I show this is not in jest. I did get myself sorted out because thankfully I found a love in chemistry and literally love making explosives and rocket fuel and things like that. But there were many of my peers who never changed their report. Their report was always like this, and they left school like that. Later as a doctor, I'd often ask people about their backgrounds, and I'd quite often come across people who said they were thick at school. And I know I was called that earlier on, and people can be labelled very early on and limited, and that's why more recently I've been involved in T-level work, validation work at national level, and a little bit of advice for the Department of Education. T-levels, you might know, are an alternative to A-level, and they give an opportunity for some school children who might either like more technical aspects or might not be able to take traditional A-levels. And T-levels can be used to actually go into university should they wish to do so. So it's just an example that I try and use throughout my talk of how I've used my past experience to potentially influence what I've done since. However, I did pull myself together and I came to A-levels. This is a very blurred picture and it reflects how I felt 2 days before my A-level results. This is on the island of Herm, and the reason I look so fraught is not worried about my A-levels, but it's because my dad had convinced me to do my first ever run. This was a run around Herm Island, which was very hilly and cliffy. My dad was an experienced marathon runner. I was not. I found out later I was nearly pushed off a cliff at the beginning, so this was nearly the shortest running career ever. I'm very grateful to say it wasn't, though, and I had many happy years running, particularly with my dad. This is us before the 1997 London Marathon. And in fact, my dad kept on running until his last running paces, which are shown here, as he completed the Brighton 10K aged 80. But all of that is in the future, and I want to talk about this. Not the bridge, although I'm very grateful to Pete Hayden for letting me use this fabulous image from around the time I was there, but about my return to Bristol. So when I finished A-levels, I was fortunate enough to get into medical school at Bristol. Unfortunately, I hadn't quite sorted myself out. I was still quite awkward, and when I ran into difficulty, I started a downward spiral that I've seen many times since as a tutor. Students often run into difficulties, they don't ask for help, they don't turn up to lectures, and things get worse and worse, and eventually I failed my second year. And even though there were actually many of us who failed the second year, I think actually the dean was changed after that. I have no complaints about that. I wasn't good enough, but it felt miserable to be bad again. After the appeal process, it was too late to get into another degree, so I did lots of jobs, mainly in factories at the time. At the time, I felt this was really just wasted time. But since then, I have reflected that I met many really amazing people in those factories who were so resilient, and I think I did learn a lot from them. But what I wanted to do was return to medicine. Now, as a scientist, we're trained as scientists to base our steps on empirical evidence. I based my next step on the fact that my mum knew everyone and talked to everyone and knew a friend who knew a friend whose son had failed medicine but had got into medicine by doing a degree at King's College London. So based on that flimsy evidence, I did exactly that. In my first year and final year, I wrote to every single medical school in the country, not by email in those days, that was calligraphy pen, every single medical school, some outside the country. Most didn't reply. Most said no, and no complaints, I'd failed. One very spiteful reply that I will say about in a moment because it's very important to me. And next, I just want to firstly point out great kudos to UCL. ION is in UCL. They were the only medical school that offered me a formal interview. And it was going really well, but the trouble is in my heart, I knew I had to say in the interview that I couldn't take a place unless a medical student had dropped out too far into the course for a school leaver to take the place, because I knew they're really precious. And that terminated the interview, I have to say. And then I received the spiteful reply, and that was actually from King's College. They didn't owe me a place in medicine, but they added an unnecessary bit when they said they wouldn't consider me. They said they would never consider me under any circumstances. And I was so upset with this. I sat down and I literally picked up a pen and paper and I was going to write a spiteful letter back. But I thought about it and prayed about it, and thankfully I didn't write the letter, because if I did, I wouldn't be here now and I'd never become a doctor. Because 2 weeks later, out of the blue, King's phoned me to say a medical student had dropped out of the course too late into the course for a school leaver to take the place. I was invited to an interview the next day, I got the place, and I loved every minute of medicine. Now, it's no surprise, and to be fair, no great credit, that I did qualify top in medicine at King's and even managed to be quite successful across London. That's mainly because I did medicine so many times. It was a lovely, yeah, exactly. You get go around again, then eventually you'll get some awards. It was a nice feeling, though. I have to admit, I did get a number of distinctions, and I actually won so many prizes that for my final prize, everyone else in the room literally got up and they asked me to leave because they thought it was unfair. I kept winning prizes, but that's simply based on the background that I'd done things so many times. The reason I'm saying this now is at the time that seemed to be what was important. But increasingly with time, I realised what was important was the engine room of failing. And I don't know if, like me, you might have a shadow CV you don't want to show people. For many years, I didn't want to admit this. But I've realised with time that that's often where the real work gets done. So what I've done is I have written about this. I was asked in the UCL Medic, this is a UCL medical student online journal, to write about this. I didn't think much of it. But I have been astonished by the impact of this. So this has been read 2,500 times, and I've lost count of the number of individual emails I've had from students going through similar problems in the UK and worldwide. Every single one, of course, I've replied to. I've also written and published elsewhere on this. But the key point here is I passed medicine. And here I need to talk about neurology, because from here on it's all about neurology and neurology education. Now, not all of you are doctors, so I do need to briefly explain what neurology is. If you think about brain, the spinal cord, nerves and muscle, and then imagine what can go wrong with them, that's kind of what interests neurologists. Things like dementia, Parkinson's disease and things like that. I need to briefly mention why I chose neurology, because it has a very important thought on giving feedback to students. When I was in my last year of as a medical student, I wanted to do every single subject, even surgery, which thankfully I never got to do because I'm clumsy. But I decided on neurology one day. There was one hot afternoon in clinic. It was a typical neurology clinic I get so used to as a consultant myself. Overbooked, running late, people are fraught. I wheeled in the first patient because they had multiple sclerosis and they were in a wheelchair. I shut the door and I sat down. And immediately the patient burst out in tears because they said their husband had left them and they were distraught. At that stage, I'd witnessed very bad role modelling from a number of doctors, not at King's, elsewhere. Often doctors would be dismissive of patients and nurses and medical students, so I feared the worst for the patient then. But I was so happy to see that the consultant neurologist put down his things, stood by the patient's side, sat down and let her talk. And he let her talk and supported her. And as this went on, I was drawn into the consultation, maybe just handing out tissues if she was crying, or a glass of water. At the end of an hour, I wheeled her out. Medically, nothing had happened, but I saw the transformation in the patient from that experience. And then I realized that neurology could offer both the clever stuff that I did like, but also the heart, which is so important. So many neurology patients cannot currently be cured, and so remembering the compassion is so important. I went back into the room and sat down. The neurology consultant was, of course, far too busy and running late now to actually teach me. But as I sat down, they nodded at me, a nod of approval. It may not seem like much, but contextually, I realized what that meant. And that was the most powerful feedback I ever received in my life, because I read into it that I was being welcomed into this community of practice in neurology. And I've remembered that since, that feedback is not necessarily like the reports I showed you earlier, or like when we mark essays. We exude feedback 24/7. It's usually the things we don't realize that people pick up on most. Maybe if you're looking at your iPhone or yawning, those are the things people remember. So we need to try and remember those as educators. I can't say I always do. Suffice to say, I decided on neurology, so I needed to do a PhD. I'm delighted that here in the audience is the wonderful Professor Chris Mathias, who took me under his wing, and he was my PhD supervisor. And I'm extremely grateful to Chris Mathias. I learned a lot from him. I then went on to complete my neurology training. An SBR basically means a registrar, a training doctor, in London, and a wonderful year in Singapore. Now, I did publish a fair number of papers. These are just a few of them. And I'm only mentioning them here because, as Alex said earlier, it's more traditional that at this point the talk takes off. Talk for the next 45 minutes about the papers, and that's great. I have so much admiration for legendary colleagues at ION who do that, absolutely legendary. I could happily talk about my research for 45 minutes, but it's not why I'm here. I'm a professor of teaching. It may be relatively new for ION, but it's well known. Of course, to be a professor is to profess, to speak about, or to teach. And actually, in UCL, there are many professors of teaching. Professor John Mitchell, Professor Ahmed Rashid, I believe, may be here tonight as shining examples of what can be achieved. But equally well, I want to be humble. I'm nowhere near these amazing researchers around me. And just to put this in context, the paper on the right was an interesting one. We described a novel genetic mutation which caused a number of symptoms, including what might loosely be termed Parkinsonism. So Parkinsonism is where something looks a bit like Parkinson's disease but isn't. Now, this paper probably not many neurologists have read. Let's compare it with the original, the essay on shaking palsy. James Parkinson, obviously, he's named since Parkinson's disease has been named after him. This famous volume from 1817, I'm sure, is under the pillow of every single neurologist, and they probably read it every night. So it's really, really famous, and I'm nothing like that. In fact, I have to admit that James Parkinson has put me in my place in the last few weeks, in an area outside neurology. My family will tell you that I love nothing better than scrabbling around the Isle of Wight looking for fossils. I was very excited not long ago to find this. The paleontologists in the museum were very excited. They wanted to buy it off me, and they took photos of it for their book. A few weeks ago, they emailed me to tell me James Parkinson got there first. So I can't even do things outside neurology. Now, maybe not many neurologists know this, but I'm sure that neurologists know that James Parkinson was actually a surgeon, not really a neurologist. But he described his main science not even as medicine, paleontology. He wrote this fabulously named book. As you can see, this is incredible. Organic Remains of a Former World, in which very annoyingly he drew this picture, which looks like my fossil. So the point of this slide is I'm not here on the research basis. I'm here as an educator. I know my place, but I also have a background as a neurologist. And I need to tell you how I became a consultant neurologist. Now, when you're a junior neurologist or a registrar, you learn your trade, and it's actually quite easy to be a junior neurologist. This was actually a picture of me when I was a senior registrar. I don't think I'm allowed to show you what I looked like as a junior registrar. However, I realised this was just a few months before my consultant interview, so I realised I had to sharpen up. I had to lose the beard, get a suit, lose the hair. Sadly, overdid that side, and then I managed to get a place at the Whittington, and the wonderful Nick Losef, I believe, is here tonight. I'm extremely grateful to Nick for interviewing me and giving me a place. Also, enormous thanks to Katie Seidel, Kevin Shields, Michael Parkinson, and many others. I also had an allied position at the Orange Building, the hospital, doing headache, and again, great thanks to Dr. Anish Barra, and again to Kevin and many others. And while I'm on this topic, more recently, I've also done some locum work at Lewisham a few years after this, and I'm particularly grateful to see Dr. Azra Siddiqui in the audience, and I'm so grateful to her and the many other wonderful people at Lewisham Hospital. However, this period between being a registrar to consultant was also important personally to me, because I got married to my wonderful wife, Debbie, in the audience here. We also have dear friends from the church behind us there, St. Luke's Church, Belinda and Paul. And also, it's a reminder to me just to say how important my Christian faith has been to me and is to me throughout this whole journey. So Debbie and me got married, we went on honeymoon, and then out popped Luke. So Luke is our son, and this morning he took his first GCSE. I'm sorry to say I don't know how that went. Hopefully it went well. Debbie's originally from Taiwan, and this is her wonderful family from Taiwan. In the audience, I believe tonight, is also her niece Amanda, who's in the picture. Luke was obviously a lot younger there at the front. I want to use this as a brief interlude because 60 minutes is a long time to be talking, and I want to give you some hopefully quite pretty pictures. I don't know how many of you have been to Taiwan, but I thoroughly recommend it. Maybe all you read about is about potential war with China, but in fact it's very different when you go there. It's full of peaceful, kind people and beautiful wildlife. This is Shitao Forest, which is high in the hills, in the middle, or mountains, I should say, in the middle of Taiwan. I've been there a couple of times, and it's incredible when you stand there, and the mist is almost muffling the bird sound around you. Last April, we were able to go finally to the east coast, the Pacific side. That's one of the highest sea cliffs in the world, and this is in Hualien County, where sadly the recent earthquake struck. So Taiwan's full of lots of things, beautiful culture, and bugs. I did say earlier that I like taking pictures of bugs, so if you don't like bugs, please look away for the next 20 seconds, because Taiwan's crawling in bugs, and they're all over the place, absolutely wonderful things. This praying mantis on Luke's hand seems to be smiling at the camera, and then this wonderful creature is actually just a harmless caterpillar. So the bugs have gone now if you want to look back. So I need to talk about why neurology needs teachers. Here I need to acknowledge that you don't need to just be a teacher, and most teachers of neurology will be brilliant and also do full-time clinical work. I'm in awe of my colleagues who do that. I'm just too disorganized to do both, I have to be honest. And so that's why now I'm just focusing on the education side. We need neurologists because 1 in 10 hospital admissions involve neurology, and that excludes stroke. The trouble is that many doctors, not all, but many doctors who are not neurologists can be scared of neurology. There is a term for it, well recognized, neurophobia. It means a fear of neurology, very well documented. And so often as a neurologist, you'd be asked to go and see a patient on the ward and give an opinion. Now you might think a plan might typically say, get a scan, do some bloods, see the therapist. I have actually on a number of occasions seen this plan. Wait for the neurologist. And I'm not joking. I'm not blaming people for it. It's up to us as neurologists to help educate people. It might be fine if there were loads of neurologists, but there aren't. So only 14% of patients with neurological problems underlying their admission will be seen in the UK by a neurologist or neurosurgery, where appropriate, on their admission. In fact, in the UK, we have currently around about 2.5 neurologists per 100,000 population. 100,000, about the size of Bath or Eastbourne. When I started neurology, it was about 1 per 100,000. That's quite a bit less than the average across Europe, currently at about 9 per 100,000 across Europe. But it's a worldwide problem in America, Australia, and when you come to lower income countries, it can be far worse. And I want to show you a graphic example about that when I come on to talk about my involvement with a clinical neurology by distance learning course, which I joined in 2017 and am currently leading. So this offers, putting it simply, a big version, a medium version, and a small version. The big version is the masters. All our students are actually working doctors based in the UK or around the world. Because it's online, they can stay wherever they are around the world and tune into the course and still keep working as doctors. These are some of my wonderful colleagues who I've worked with on the course, the wonderful Dr. Salman Haider at the front, and the wonderful Miss Anna Folks, who's been our administrator actually before I joined and still is, and the fabulous Dr. Amit Batla, who was really involved with actually setting up the course as well. More recently, we've had the fabulous Mr. Chris Routh as well as our wonderful administrator, as well as Anna. Our course has actually been quite successful in a number of areas. In 2019, I applied to the Royal College of Physicians and we were able to reach the finals of the Excellence in Patient Care Awards, giving a certificate for acknowledgement for the impact of our course. Now, for those of you who think about universities, you might realise that master's course means research. So how can you do research online? We tend to use systematic reviews. Systematic reviews basically involve students looking at specified publications, not just to summarise them, but to see if by analysing them they might glean some new information or knowledge. Still, I think many people might say that's second-class research. Research is all about looking forward in wet labs. I want to show you that actually it's possible to look back and find lost knowledge. I'd like you to answer silently, I'm afraid. I don't think it's unfortunately supposed to be interactive. How old you think this original was? I need to explain what I'm talking about. This is a replica for what the original device would have looked like, because the device, when it was found, was in such a state of disrepair. My particular thanks to Professor Tony Freeth, who's allowed me to use these wonderful images. Now, I don't know about you, but if I didn't know better, I'd say, well, obviously there are multiple gears. I'll give you the extra information. It has been thought to be the world's oldest analog computer, and it was used to accurately predict positions of celestial bodies such as planets. You might think that looks like something clever, pre-Victorian, maybe 1700s. Maybe it was Leonardo da Vinci's side project. It's actually more than 2,000 years old. For those of you who are up close, you might see the Greek letters at the front, because this was the fabulous Antikythera mechanism, so called because it was found sunk in a Roman ship under the Mediterranean near the island of Antikythera. When it was discovered in 1904, it was felt impossible to be old. It was felt like a modern artifact. So this is a good example to show that knowledge is not a relentless progress forward. It can be lost. Now, people might say, it's fine now, we've got the internet. You're never going to lose something. But in place of the Mediterranean Sea, we now have a sea of information, and knowledge can be easily lost. If you use PubMed, it's one of the leading search engines we use, and just type in the word neurology, just for the last 4 months, you'll get 20,000 articles, papers. So it's so easy for knowledge to be lost with the relentless progress forward. So yes, you can do online research, and it can be done through systematic reviews. There are some other issues with online courses, some challenges that you can face. And one of these is to do with participation. On our course, when I joined, there was already a fabulous series, we were called the monthly activities at the time, of case studies, which Amit and others had actually set up, with absolutely fabulous. These were optional hypothetical cases, So maybe tell our students, imagine a patient has this, what would you do next? Now, the students who did them said they were great, but not all students did them. And so I wondered, maybe, could we use incentives to improve participation? I remembered back to my medical school days, and I had to dig around a bit for this. This is my Todd medal for coming first in medicine at King's. I wanted to design a medal, so I designed this medal for the course. I drew a brain, I put the Wi-Fi signal to symbolise neurology by distance learning. I worked with the medal makers in Birmingham to produce this, and we named it the Simon Shorven Medal in honour of Professor Simon Shorven, who set up the course and indeed has been influential and very supportive to all of us since that time. The idea was to engrave the student name round the rim, and there was a more traditional UCL image on the other side. However, before we dished out the medals, I wanted to ask another question. Now, you might wonder what on earth that is, and I didn't make it. I wonder if you can guess what it's made of. It's actually made of money. Because if you're talking about an incentive of medal, it's a bit like a gift. So you could say which is effective, a gift or money in terms of incentivizing. This amazing image is from a paper by Kube and colleagues in 2012, and they looked in the workplace environment and found that €7 is more effective in incentivizing if it's presented as a gift. That's €7. The face is €2, the body is an origami €5. And that's exactly what I found. So firstly, I actually presented this as £100 with a certificate, the equivalent of the value of the medal. And that didn't increase participation. But then, when we actually brought the medal up as an option, that did increase participation. So we handed out the medals. These, I should say, are photos the students have given me, and they've all allowed me to use them tonight. The first ever medal was given to Dr. Gift Nwende there. If you remember, I said that in lower income countries, the need for neurologists can be really severe. Gift works in Zimbabwe with a population of approximately 16 million. There are 2 neurologists. His colleague is the only other one. Both of them were actually on our course. I'm full of awe of doctors like Gift who can do this amazing achievements that he does. The middle one is the most recent award. Andrew flew in from Australia to pick up his award. That's actually in the shadow of the Queen in Queen Square. And then the second winner, Dr. Camille Abdul from Trinidad, showing her medal. And Camille is a reminder that actually I went on to do some interactive work with our students, looking at their view of our course to see if it could improve. So getting the perspective of students. I briefly want to talk about perspective. I don't know if any of you have seen this image before. Some of you might say, what image? You can't even see it. There is a dot there. This is actually a very famous picture. This picture is us, or was us, if you remember what you did on Valentine's Day 1990, because that's when this photo was taken. It was the last photo ever taken by Voyager 1 as it turned its cameras round 34 minutes before it shut them off forever, 3.7 billion miles from Earth. At that great distance, you can't tell anything at all. This would be a bit like someone just flicking through a prospectus and not being able to say anything about our course. But you can get another problem when you're at the centre of the course, like I am now. I'm the director of the Clinical Neurology by Distance Learning course. And when you're very close, you sometimes can't see the wood for the trees. I don't know if any of you might be able to guess what this famous monument is. If I pull back a little bit, you might get it, for those of you who've been there. And then a little bit further back, if you get the perspective, say, of a student, you sometimes see things that are immediately obvious, but not to the person in the middle. This fabulous picture of the Angel of the North. I was giving a presentation at an international education conference in Newcastle. I hopped in a taxi at lunchtime, and I'd really recommend it if you get the chance to see it. So what we did is I worked with students. There was Camille in Trinidad, CY in Malaysia, another student in Australia, and online based on 4 continents. We got the student view, we got them to analyse our course and my teaching. I have to admit, there were quite a few eye-opening points they made about it I didn't know. Some of them were simple ones about signposting, and some of them were sensible ideas about how we could make the course more interactive. And I'm going to mention how we followed this advice in the next slide. But firstly, I just want to say that this was one of a number of examples where thankfully I was able to get a publication with the students afterwards, And this is really important because for many of our students, they won't have publications already. And as I said with my dad many years ago, it's lovely if you can lift up the learners so you're on the same level, a kind of flat hierarchy. So we followed their advice. This slide is actually from the UCL Education Conference a few years back. My friend and colleague Salman, we'd actually done an online version of that case study. We'd invited students wherever they were in the world on our course to tune in on Teams and then discuss a case. This particular call involved simultaneous involvement from 6 continents. The star on the upper left involved a student getting up at 4:30 in the morning in Canada, the bottom right nearly midnight in Australia. It was exhilarating to be part of this. Now, this was in the time of early COVID when a lot of people were rubbishing the ability of online learning to be a real community of learners. But in fact, I surveyed these students afterwards and they overwhelmingly agreed that this really was a community. I'm sorry I did mention surveys. It's one slide only, but it is a little bit important to me. The first thing, forget the long words. All you need to remember that PTAS is probably the most important university survey sent nationally for postgraduate students. So you would have thought that's important. Everyone's going to get involved with that. When I joined the course, our course was actually quite similar to the national level. It was really low participation rates, so not many students filled in the survey. And if not many people fill in the survey, you don't really know how to interpret it. Now, these were actually quite low percentage levels, and I wondered how I could improve things. I remembered what I tried with the medal and money, but you can't give people a medal for participating in a survey. But then there's a little bit of information I haven't told you yet. When I asked the students which they preferred, a medal or money, many of them said a third option. They said what really incentivized them was the fact that I gave them such detailed individual feedback. In fact, one of them used the phrase they felt valued by it. And so that's exactly what I did. I just sent personalized email requests instead of the usual thing we all send out without meaning to, spam email, which of course we delete. And perhaps not surprisingly, participation in the survey dramatically improved to 68%. That takes a lot of time to write those emails, though, so subsequently I was able to show it's possible to scale this using a variant of mail merge models. I was then able to show my technique by giving webinars to a large number of advanced HE survey officers. So these are the people that kind of implement the survey across universities in the UK, associated temporarily with overall participation rates which increased. Last 2 lines are very dear to me, although they're only 2 lines. I was very thankful to the EDI team here at the ION to invite me a few years ago to get part as a lead on this Student and Education Action Group. This was great fun. I had an amazing group with me, Tracy Skinner and many fabulous students, because we were tasked with making, implementing, and then analysing the first ION-specific student survey. But what I really loved about this was it wasn't asking about the courses. This was focusing on mental health and well-being. And I think all those years back when I was at Bristol, when I absolutely would have loved a survey like that. And what I really like about this, and credit to ION, is they really seem to listen and try and change things. It's now approaching its 4th iteration now. I'm no longer in that role, I should say. 1 slide only on COVID, Cambridge, and then talking heads. I'll explain what that means. I want to tread very respectfully here because I know some people were hit very hard by COVID, their families or even their own health. All of us, of course, did what we could. I went up to the NHS Nightingale for a little while. I know the NHS Nightingale hospitals have had a lot of stick recently, but what a lot of people don't know is actually there was a lot of educational activity there. In fact, because there weren't many patients, very early on I actually moved to the education faculty there. While I was there, we taught over 1,000 healthcare workers across London, from hospitals all over London, rapidly upskilling them on COVID-specific skills like CPR, PPE, all that kind of thing. And it was through this connection that I was invited in the autumn, in preparation for the second wave, to lead a pan-London critical care educator training. And I don't know anything about critical care, but what I did know about was how to teach online. These days, probably any one of you could teach this with your eyes closed, but not back in that day. So that's how I was able to help. But increasingly I was realising I was doing a lot of teaching and I was becoming a stereotype of a doctor. You probably heard see one, do one, teach one. What am I actually learning about teaching? I realised I need some education about education. And so I went on to Cambridge University. I was able to do this while working and got the PG certificate. I loved being a student again. I loved writing essays and I got a distinction. And then they invited me to work for Cambridge University as a tutor on this course, which was a great experience. And one thing I loved there was actually doing this particular thing, which I might actually need Derek's help with because I'm not sure if I can activate this. Let's see if I can use this. I can. Don't worry, you don't need to hear me talk here. This is a short video I did, and I just want to show it because I've got a dinosaur on it. Basically, what I'm doing here is I was interested in using short videos for education. Now, you probably all like YouTube. The trouble is with YouTube, you don't quite know who's behind the camera. So wouldn't it be good if you knew who was doing the video? So this is one, I'm obviously a headache consultant, and I did this for the International Headache Society. It's on their webpage. And the reason 5 minutes is important, I'm sorry that you all have to endure 60 minutes. It's traditional, but it's not evidence-based. Attention span rapidly diminishes within about 10 minutes. Probably the optimum is 5 to 7 minutes. And actually, if you could do short videos, it's much better. To be honest, if I'd been allowed to, I probably would have done this in 5 minutes, but I don't think I'd have been allowed to. You probably would have liked it. But so basically, I think there is a lot of a future for these much shorter videos. And one other thing I just want to mention about this, very often as educators, we're actually teaching to the converted, if I can use that phrase. We have conferences of specialists and we talk about specialist things that many people already know roughly about. I actually wanted to direct this outwards. If most people with headaches will never see a doctor, most people with headaches who see a doctor will not see a neurologist or a headache specialist. They'll see a GP or another doctor who may not know or possibly not even care about headaches. So I think it's very important to remember to look outwards when we educate and not just within our specialist field. So I'm going to move forward from there and talk about something very close to my heart, which is international medical student teaching. I'm not paid to do this, but I really do like doing this. Very importantly here is Crisis Rescue Foundation, CRF. This is led by an amazing GP in London, Dr. Sharon Raymond. And what it does is it provides free online medical lectures for medical students and doctors based around the world who've been impacted by conflict. This was started a few weeks after the conflict started in Ukraine. Since then, it's rapidly expanded beyond that with the conflict in Sudan, the Middle East, and indeed elsewhere. I'm a lecturer on this. I've also obtained 4 grants for CRF. I'm sorry, I have to put a little plug here. If any of you can think of any other sources of funding, please let me know, because this fabulous course may not be able to go on much longer without that. All us educators give our time for free, but there is some inevitable spending needed on the admin. So this is a very impressive course, I think, mainly saying it because of Sharon's work. And as I said, we've got 2,500 registered students. They're based all over the place. Now, you might look at that map and say, hang on, I don't think there's a conflict in America or Australia or the UK. This map is important because in part it represents students and doctors who have to flee countries facing conflict. That must be terrible for them and their families. And of course, we all desperately hope and pray for just peace in these areas of conflict. If you look at past evidence in Libya and Iraq, you know there's often a long shadow. Not everyone will go home. Healthcare can be impacted in a devastating way for decades to come, so-called brain drain. One interesting survey I did of these students from Ukraine was to ask them about the impact of the lectures. And I found a significant number of those who were able to stay in Ukraine said the online lectures had allowed them to do that. And a significant number of those who'd had to leave said it was more likely they would return because of the provision of online lectures. It's the first evidence, actually, I'm aware of that online teaching might help to a small degree with this devastating effect of brain drain. I need to mention also briefly some work I've been involved with another long name, CMAC, let's call them, previously MSEC, an amazing body within UCL who have set up in collaboration with host countries, whole medical schools in Thailand, in Egypt and elsewhere. I've been able to do just a little bit here, just helping with some of the medical school curricula for those two. The reason I particularly want to mention this, and thank you very much indeed for Professor Ahmed Rashid for his letting me get involved here, is that the Thai medical students have now actually come through, and now actually one of them has actually joined my course, which I'm going to talk about next. And sorry, is it okay if I say the wonderful Pun? So thank you very much. Pun is here tonight, so thank you. It's really great that he's with us from Thailand. And I need to talk about that now, and we're getting near the end of my talk, okay? So this is the new Clinical Neurology and Brain Sciences IBSc. The I stands for integrated, because at UCL, in your third year, 5-year typical degree for medicine, you add another year to take another degree. It's a 1-year degree. And we think that this is the first IBSc in clinical neurology in the UK, and definitely the first undergraduate degree at the ION. It's got a hybrid design, so some of it's face-to-face, some of it's online. We incorporate MSc modules, so some existing teaching, so I'm very grateful to some of my colleagues at ION for helping out. Also extremely grateful to, we've got excellent help from Angela and also from Lucy from the admin side on the course. And actually, I'm not just saying it because my students are here, but fantastic performance and engagement from the students on the course. They've been involved in presenting in conferences, and fingers crossed, hopefully maybe trying to write up some submissions for possible publications. This is a bag. I know you might not have come to see a bag. All neurologists have to carry a kit bag, not quite like a plumber, but you've got to carry things like a tendon hammer, ophthalmoscope, and traditionally everyone has their own bag. I quite like the idea of doing a kind of a branded bag, because I don't think one's ever been produced before. So I made this one. It's all kind of official and legitimate because it's used the right logos and even the right bag manufacturer. And I just wanted to fill it with all the goodies I would have wanted as a medical student, because I'd like this to be permanent. I'd like to think that our students will take this beyond qualification and take it out to other hospitals, hopefully as an advocate for the course. One final little point, I'm very clumsy. My neurology bag, my tendon hammer always fell out, usually at the most inconvenient moment, and would clatter on the floor. So I fitted this with a leather holster to keep the tendon hammer in place. Maybe the students aren't as clumsy as me. But as I said earlier, when you give feedback, even better if. This was the first course, so the first year of the course, so things could be better. We need to space out the assessments a bit better, I know, for next year. And this is just one thing that possibly could have been better. I did some work with the wonderful Helen Johansson, who's an experienced ceramicist near Queen Square. And what we actually looked at was part of the Trellis Arbor project. We were looking at seeing if we could maybe do a joint academic sort of art type thing, maybe trying to use making brains in early teaching of neurology, maybe just for the first lesson. And we did get through the first grant. We didn't ultimately make it all the way. And just perhaps if I show you another example of this. So what I particularly like, though, is that what Helen did, which was really clever, if you look at the image on the left, which is obviously not anatomically correct as a prototype, what she used is clay from the foundations of 256 Gray's Inn Road, that's the new building, which is rich in iron ore. And so she fired that in, and it creates this wonderful pattern, which I just quite liked that imagery because it was supposed to be for the new building. So maybe, who knows, in the future that could be a possibility. We really haven't got long now, I promise, probably about 10 minutes. So when we're looking forward now, you always have to talk about artificial intelligence, AI. I'm going to talk about generative AI producing images, either still images or video images. But first, a brief analogy. Sometimes you can get images which look pretty amazing as a still photo. I don't know how many of you know that that's not Roswell, it's not a captured UFO. It's a genuine aircraft that the US Air Force developed after the Canadian Air Force in the 50s and early 60s. That's genuine, and I think it looks pretty amazing. It really flew. However, like many of these things, when you actually look at the moving version, it's not so impressive. Travelling no faster than 30 miles an hour, a few feet off the ground, and I wouldn't have liked to have got in that. And that's why you don't see these things flying overhead on a regular basis. So sometimes the still picture is better than the video. And I need to give my evidence here, particularly because that used USA National Archives. I am allowed to use these images. Okay, so what am I talking about? I'm talking about generative AI. All of you would probably have used generative AI text to text, like ChatGPT, but you can use it to create amazing images as well. This is an image I made. Sorry, it's a bit horrible. It's not an anti-smoking campaign. I use this in my teaching. This is made, it's not an image from the internet, it's one I made, so it's entirely new using Midjourney, which is one of the tools you can use. And what it's showing is a cigarette smoker with a cigarette actually on their finger, and they don't seem to notice it. There is a condition in neurology where you have a syrinx, a swelling of the central canal in the cervical spine, which can mean that you lose the sense of temperature and pain in your fingertips. And I have seen smokers present with painless burns actually in their fingers. So that's why I use this as an example there. Sometimes in more general medicine, you might need to include the face. So this is not a patient, it's not a real person, this is made up with AI. This is for more general medical, maybe looking at the thyroid gland. The trouble is when you include the face, you've got to worry about consent and confidentiality. This is from an upcoming publication I did with students, a book chapter that's coming out. And then for a different publication I did with some other students, we've looked more generally. Now, I think for the medics in the room, they might buy this as a reasonable portrayal of someone with low thyroid levels, hypothyroidism. So you've got the receding hair, brittle hair, even loss of the outer third of the eyebrows, the kind of puffy, tired-looking face. Not a real patient, made up with AI. So I think that there's great potential. The tricky thing, though, is that this is a symmetrical appearance. In that same paper, we showed where the current limits are when you try and do asymmetry. Now, all neurologists will know Horner or Horner's syndrome, where you have asymmetrical symptoms. You get some quite subtle features of the eye, the eyelids, a smaller pupil, and even with a little bit of editing, fudging, we couldn't quite do it properly. So we had to acknowledge that symmetrical is good, but asymmetrical currently not so good. But the take-home message is that they're actually pretty good at the moment, and you can use these quite easily without worrying so much about consent and confidentiality even now. If you remember the analogy in the last slide, moving images are a different kettle of fish. You can do text to video, and thank you very much for Aidan for use of this, but they're not always very good. So this is an avatar. Many of them use avatars. You can get an avatar made of yourself, actually, to do this. The avatars are not too bad, but when you come onto the video that I haven't included here, they'll often use stock video that's been stitched together. Often actually not bad. Give a little soundtrack, but it's not original video. It is possible to get original video, and I was able to do this again using Midjourney, but it's at a much more primitive level. So this is not stock footage. This is asking it to make an image, a moving image of someone with a walking stick. The good thing is it's all totally new. The bad thing is, well, you can kind of see the bad thing. It's not actually very accurate. However, this is advancing at a rapid pace, and potentially in a year or two, you could just dictate your lecture, and it would be turned into a video. So that would be fantastic. I've reached my final slide, I'm pleased to say. Now, a little something. I know I'm not getting ideas above my station. It's not my idea. People have been talking about this for 25 years, and nor indeed am I at all leading on this in any way, but I'd love to see a future joint neurology education centre linking the enormous talents at the ION with the hospital. It's something I've been thinking for a while, but I know lots of other much more senior people would doubtless be thinking about that. I'd love to be involved with that if that ever occurred. And then the final slide is just really to say a big thank you to everyone who's attended, who survived this lecture. Thank you very much. And the final picture I have to give is thank you for my late mum and dad. They particularly loved this picture, and they would have loved today as well. So thank you very much. That's the end. Thank you.
Hi there. People who don't know me, I'm Amit Batla. I think I've appeared on some of the pictures, so you can recognize me. I'm a bit older than Tim's showed you. So thank you, Tim. Amazing lecture. And I must say, I've known you for so many years, but this is the most I've seen you talk about yourself, which is, I think if you know Tim, you'll understand what I mean, because he's the person who you don't hear talking about himself. So you had to become a professor to give this lecture for us to know you. So that's great. And secondly, I don't want to be the the burden between an excellent lecture and the drinks, so I'll keep it very brief. I know it's everybody's waiting for the drinks as well. So all the years that I've known Tim, I think what I've understood, and you must have understood through the lecture as well, his attention to detail and his excellent, kind heart is what you get in his education. And I think I'm witness to it I've witnessed it more closely than a lot of you have. And I can see that his sort of passion to education, which was quite a remarkable journey for both of us, to be honest, the year 2017, when I took on the call to become a consultant, and you joined in, and you were leaving a post of a consultant and becoming an educationist. So I think this transition has worked very beautifully for both of us, and I'm so thankful for your sort of help throughout the years with everything that we've done. And I've always appreciated the kindness, and the love the students have expressed for you is amazing. And I must share that from the student side as well, that they've all been sort of really appreciative of all that you've done. So thank you to everyone who's attended this lecture. I think it's been an excellent event of education. It's a celebration in itself to have somebody progress through education. I think it's something that we've been talking about so many years, but seeing that in practice. And I must say thank you to everyone who's attended, and I can see Professor Simon Chauvin, who's sitting there and smiling as well. I think he's the initiator of all the devils that we've created in ourselves. So I think he's led us by the education, and Professor Alex Leff, who's sort of really mentored and helped us throughout this progress. And I can see that Tim has really caught on to that sort of thank you. So thank you so much, and drinks are waiting for us. So.